So, welcome to Famous When I'm Dead, Artist Empowerment Podcast, where creators share with you the tools so you can thrive while you're still alive. I'm your host, Sam King Davis. And if you want to stay up to date with upcoming guests and interviews and other content, you can go to our Instagram page, famous_when_I'm_dead. You can check us out on Facebook under that same address. And yeah, today we have a very special guest from Canada, amazing sculptor and photographer. Let's just get right into it. Julia Barnett.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, welcome.
Thank you.
So yeah, thanks for doing the interview. Maybe we can just start with like a question that's not like, the typical kind of interview question. Like, how about what's something that people don't know about you or can't find out about you through reading your bio?
Oh man. Um, there's probably quite a lot. I tend to kind of keep my personal life fairly private. I guess one thing is that we move around a lot. My partner is an academic, and so we end up kind of traveling a little bit all over the world every now and then. So we've done kind of UK, Canada, Toronto. We don't know where's next, and so yeah, we're not based in one place for very long, and I'm actually kind of hoping that the next one will be kind of a good place to put down roots and really kind of hunker down for a little bit.
So you're traveling a lot around the world, huh?
It's a bit of a traveling circus. We've got like 2 dogs, a cat, a frog, a couple of fish.
A frog?
We do, yeah. I think you can see him. It's a fire-bellied toad. Um, but yeah, so we have kind of the zoo and the the do 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 music as we're going across the province borders.
So I guess you've probably learned how to be pretty minimal then, yeah?
Yeah, yeah, we don't have a lot of stuff. I've always been fairly minimal. The only thing that I really kind of go a little bit batshit crazy with is art supplies.
Yeah.
So most of my stuff is kind of like art gear, camera gear.
That's that's a tough one for me too. I get this image of me like huddled in the corner surrounded by my art supplies and like people in white coats are like, "Come with us, Mr. David. Come King Davis. Come on, come on." I've been trying to get rid of them. I'm moving over to more digital stuff, which is weird for me because I'm also a sculptor. So, yeah, getting rid of sculptural stuff is tough. So you keep it pretty minimal in your studio then, huh? Like you're working with polymer clay or?
Yeah. So it's Sculpey and paint and wool and wood is kind of the primary thing. My first love is ceramics, but with COVID and everything kind of shutting down, I had a little bit more time and actually got to work on the stuff that I really wanted to dig into. And so it's been a lot more polymer than clay recently.
Do you bake your stuff in the same oven you bake your pizzas?
Yeah. No,
Really? You sure that's safe?
it's not toxic. It's fine. I think. Ask me when I grow a gill.
Yeah.
I think it's okay. Basically, everything in the house is fair game. Like Jim's used to it now. We're both fairly obsessive, and so we go through these phases where just like everything just gets surrounded. And if there's something in the house that I think I can like incorporate into a piece, that just gets seized, and there's just no questions asked.
Yeah.
So we've got a good system. But yeah, no, the oven does its work. I just wish it was a little bit bigger, I think.
So why don't we talk about your work a little bit more? There'll be a slideshow in the YouTube part of this interview, but um, yeah, let's just talk about that. Like, what was your first experience with sculpture?
Uh,
I mean, like the moment where you had this experience where you're like, this is it. Like, I'm definitely gonna keep doing this.
so it's something that I've always done. Art's always been an outlet, and I think the first kind of thing that I remember is, um, like when you're a kid and you have a bath and like you have toys and you have soap, and I was making the soap into stuff,
Huh.
and we didn't we went through kind of phases of not having a lot. And I remember the dollar store near us had these kind of like blocks of soap that you can get. And so I would just buy like 5 of them and just like carve them out into these like weird figures. And um, from then on, I did art in college and a little bit of it in university. And it just stuck. I've always done it on the side. It's been an outlet for as long as I can remember. Um,
Did you study something else?
I studied art, but there wasn't much in the way of like technical learning.
Hmm.
Uh, so there was a lot of photography, a lot of kind of like art history, communications, the degree that's really helpful for real life.
Yeah.
Uh, and, ended up going into a completely different career for a long time. And as things progressed, it just, I kept coming back to it, kept coming back to it. And every free minute was doing that. And so, as soon as I had the chance, I kind of jumped in.
Yeah, so was there like how did that moment feel? Because I had a similar moment. I was actually in inbound sales for like 7 years.
Mhm.
But I was studying art and I always did art on the side. And then there was kind of like there was a moment where it all changed, like I decided to take the dive. So how was that? Can we talk about that moment in your life where that changed?
Yeah, it's not clean cut actually. It's been kind of a, you know, take a little step in, you know, feel it out, take a little step back, and then um, finally I was able to really dive in. But I remember when we were in the UK, right around when Brexit was going on, I did an art sale, and it ended up being that I sold everything I had. Uh, and because of Brexit, I had just been laid off, and I didn't know what was going to happen. And I've got EU citizenship, and so they were kind of like, "Well, we'd love to have you. We don't know whether we can keep you," and so kind of shifting everybody out. And I did this art sale, and as things were going and going and going, I ended up being able to live off that for 6 months.
Wow. So what kind of stuff was that, all sculptural stuff as well, or?
Yeah, yeah, most of it was sculptures. I had a couple of prints. It was kind of my first foray into polymer as well. I had a couple of like little old men that were done in a similar style to what you see on Instagram right now. And I was really surprised. And then I kind of started feeling around for galleries, and I ended up going into this tiny one. And Lam, who's actually a fabulous painter, uh, was curating at the time, and I kind of came in with my like little portfolio, like still everything on paper, and was just like, "Hi, I'd really like to be part of this." And she gave me the whole like, "Thank you, we'll call you" spiel. And then as I was walking out, um, she actually like flipped through my stuff and then ran after me to be like, bring it, we'll show it. And that was kind of a really pivotal moment as well.
So those were photographs of your sculptures, or
Yeah, I did like the whole old school portfolio where like you walk from gallery to gallery and you're like, please have me. Please take my stuff.
this was like a big gallery in town, or it was for a big exhibition, or?
No, it was a little gallery that was in Bristol where we lived, and
Wow.
had a really big art scene. So like UK is very very strong on kind of an art culture. It's more ingrained in the home than it is in North America. So people have sculptures and paintings and stuff like that, much more so than I've seen here. And so there's a lot of galleries, and there's a lot of art, and there's a lot of kind of like day to day art, like a lot of
Hmm.
graffiti, a lot of stuff like that. And so um, I was able to find one that was kind of high end enough and also just eclectic enough that it really fit well. And
Hmm.
that was a good moment.
Do you have you ever heard of Wilfred Wood?
I haven't.
He's not the typical kind of high-end sculptor, like, realistic and kind of, yeah, I don't know. I hope he doesn't hear this and get pissed that I call him not high-end. No, but he knows that he knows he's more of like a brute kind of, but he approaches that sort of style, but he has art training. But anyway, he does these like basically plasticine sculptures who he completely inspired me. I have a pile of them over there. But they're basically caricatures, but
Yeah.
they're done like Man, they just have so much kind of impact and real like quirkiness. Um, which actually I kind of wanted to ask you about your work because, typically like when people think of sculptures, they think of, the most beautiful sculpture that they know. And
Mm.
on your front page, you have like the woman like laying on her side, and there's like kind of, it looks like real crusty kind of skin.
Yeah.
So
Excellent.
so I'm interested in like kind of what led to that. Like it's like really human and authentic and real. So I'm interested in like if you were always kind of going in that direction or there was some shifting point there.
There definitely was. It's something that I'd experimented with before. And the truth of it is that it wasn't very well received. And so I struggled for a long time to actually figure out what was me and, what's influences elsewhere. And like people would really like other stuff that I was doing, and it just didn't feel, when something feels unfinished, it doesn't feel right.
Mhm.
Um, and so I'd end up with that feeling, and I didn't want to share the work, and I didn't feel like I could really put myself out there. And like I remember in university, I did paintings that were a lot like this, but like a little bit more caricaturish, like bigger eyes and that kind of thing. And I remember someone coming up to me and just telling me that my stuff gave them nightmares, and that it
What
actually
the
kept them up, and like they would never sleep in the same room as one of my pieces. And I've had that with these sculptures as well, because people feel
You're
like,
like, "Oh, thanks."
I know, and it's just like part of me is just like, great, okay, my art horrifies you, and then the other part of me is just like, okay, well, it's got an impact that is strong enough that is keeping you awake at night. I'll take that, and choose,
Yeah, yeah.
which I do. But I would get kind of like really well-meaning people that would come up and just be like, oh, well, why don't you do something a little bit more classical, or like that thing that you did was really, would fit a lot better in this space. And it just didn't feel authentic, and it didn't feel honest, and I didn't feel like I was kind of putting all of me in it. And so I would kind of have these attempts at doing more realistic stuff and doing kind of more, I guess, kind of creepy, crusty people. And um it was really hit or miss. And then at some point I something kind of shifted into gear, and I was just like, okay, well, if I'm not doing this for myself, who am I really doing it for? um, this is my release, my kind of catharsis. I need this in order to function as a human being. And
Mhm.
so, why don't I try and see what happens? And then I remember the first kind of piece I did in Canada. So I had like my Grumpy Old Men, which I really liked. And then um, when we got back, I did Granny G in kind of a really realistic way. And she came out really quickly and in a way that like I never anticipated. Um, and that was it. There was just no going back after that. It's kind of like, when you level up and you're just like everything that you've done before that just doesn't count.
Yeah.
Um, so it was a bit like that.
Hmm. So I guess you know Ron Mueck. Was he like a big influence, or do you
Uh,
remember when you first saw his work?
I do actually. I was at the Museum of Fine Art.
Oh, you saw it in person.
I did. I
Yeah,
did.
that's totally different impact. Yeah.
Um, I love his work. I do. The one that really got to me, and I cannot for the life of me find anywhere that pronounces his name, so I really hope I don't massacre it. I Googled this for like an hour yesterday, just like trying to like see all the videos if anybody would say it. But I think uh, Zhang Che, he's a Korean artist, and he does these really emotive, realistic sculptures that are a little bit smaller, and they kind of incorporate whimsy and different animal parts and things like that. And
How do
I
you
remember,
spell it?
uh, so it's Choi is his last name,
Uh-huh.
and
Okay.
his first name is
I think
X.
that's Choi, right?
I think the I think in Korean it's pronounced Che
Oh,
or Che.
okay.
Um, please don't like if anybody hears that and it's just like you're so wrong. I apologize very very profusely. Um, but yeah, I remember seeing his work and it just resonating. Um, like when you hear a piece of music and it just kind of hits that string and it vibrates just right. And it was that moment of being like I want to make art that feels like that. Um, but there's a whole bunch of other artists that are a little bit all over the place that kind of also have inspired me in different ways. So there's like Beksinski, and he does like really dark stuff. Did really dark stuff. He's no longer alive, but
What's the name?
Beksinski, he's a Polish artist.
Oh yeah, I guess I don't know him.
He's a painter. He did a lot of work that kind of came out of the psyche of the Second World War.
There's
And
also another female artist that was coming out of the Second World War, I think, and she was doing a lot of paintings on death.
okay,
And like I think it was more like charcoal stuff. She did a lot of charcoal stuff. I forget her name.
all right.
Totally not helpful. You're welcome. I don't remember her
Random
name.
woman for good art. I'd love to. Yeah, I'd love to see it. I really enjoy kind of macabre art, and I used to do a lot of it back in the day. So I'd make like little sculptures that were really skeletal, that were like homages to that dark side. But yeah, no, going back to Mark, I definitely had a couple of moments where you look at a piece and it's just like it's life altering. It just changes everything that you look at, and you can't go back to the way things were before, because you have to enter into this new world or not at all.
Okay, so we'll take a short break, and when we come back... Hey, thanks for watching Famous When I'm Dead podcast. This episode and all future episodes are going to be available on any one of your favorite podcast apps. I'll also be making all of my interviews from last year available as we move forward. This podcast is free for you to listen to, but it is not free for me to produce. Currently, it's about $140 a month to produce this podcast, if and I hope I can keep my video editor. So I want to give a shout out to the patrons, Tom Lambert and Lynne Davis at the $10 level, Chance McGee at the $5 level. You can find him on Instagram at Chance McGee Kunst. If you are still listening at this point, chances are that you do get value out of this podcast. If you are able to and you want to show us some love, be sure to pop over to our Patreon page. It's Patreon, patreon.com/famous when I'm dead. The link will be in the description below. If you're strapped for cash and you still want to show us some love and support, make sure that you share the podcast with friends, family. Maybe you have students that might be interested in hearing the stories of these professional artists. So make sure you go to Instagram at famous_when_I'm_dead and stay up to date on all the new exciting stuff we got going on. Thanks for watching, and be sure to leave us a thumbs up and a comment below. Welcome back. So can we talk a little bit about the inside of the sculpture? So you're using wire, like regular sculptor wire, and then like aluminum foil, or how are you building the armature?
Yeah. So I'll do aluminum, or you can also use ceramic, as long as it's like a water resistant, like moisture resistant material. So these ones are mostly aluminum and wire, and the reason for that is because they weigh a ton for the size.
Really?
They're actually quite hefty. So I'm working on a head right now, and it's got body.
Are you looking at it right now?
I am, yeah.
Can you show the camera? We're gonna just do a show and tell. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I saw that. Oh man, that is really intense.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's bigger than I thought. I thought you were doing smaller than that.
She's close to life size. She's like, I'd say like a third smaller than a real human head. But yeah, she was fun.
Are they like portrait, like almost some kind of self-portrait, or are they like inspired by I mean, I guess it's unavoidable that they're inspired by certain people, but is there any particular person in mind that you're thinking of when you're making these?
It's less a person and more a feeling.
Mm-hmm.
They're probably all kind of semi-autobiographical. Semi-autobiographical. I can't speak. Yeah, I mean they all have probably an element of people that I've seen, gestures that I've seen. always been a really big people watcher and kind of watching expressions and kind of micro gestures. Um, but I don't use references. I don't have kind of a particular idea in mind going into them, and when I do, it's never that comes out. Like this was supposed to be a small man holding his belly. Like it's just
Oh, okay.
started,
Wow.
and it was like, yeah, that's not going to happen. Um, and so yeah, they're entirely their own. I'm kind of more of a. It sounds really cheesy, but like they don't really give me a choice in what they're going to be.
Yeah. That's okay. That sounds okay. I've heard people put it that way, like much more the sculpture makes itself. I'm just the vessel, you're not.
Yeah, no. Um,
But yeah, that happens in sculpture. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I definitely I remember I started when I first used Sculpey, I had a person in mind and I started sculpting and it was like a young woman that was in the conference that I was in, and then it ended up being like one of the older, chubbier guys. Like it just looked like him when I was finished. So I kept going that direction.
that's a
Um, so, I wanted to ask you after seeing that piece, do you know Franz Xavier Messerschmidt? Have you heard of this artist?
It sounds familiar. I'm so straight up. I am so shit with names. I will remember faces, places, conversations. Names, I'm just not. Like if I probably saw an image of his work, I'd know.
It's normal. Most people aren't very good with names, but he was a Viennese sculptor, I think in 1800s, early 1800s, and he was basically like doing these sculptures um, of the aristocrats or whatever, and he started sculpting like more realistic. So, if one of the aristocrats was like kind of a chubby lady and had a double chin, like he would sculpt that. And then of course he fell out of favor with the aristocrats, right? And they promised him like the head of sculpture at the Vienna Art Academy. And I think two different times he got turned down or his position got taken by somebody else. So he was really like an authentic sculptor and he kind of like stuck to what he saw, but his work
Mhm.
is really beautiful. But anyway, what happened is he ended up, I guess, getting a resentment or, getting pissed off about all of what went down. And he went out to a town that was, an hour or so away from Vienna. And he met a guy, a psychologist who was doing shock therapy at the time. But at the time, the shock therapy was like early shock therapy. So they were just like experimenting, really. They were putting people in bathtubs and shocking them and
Stick a fork in a socket with a
asphyxiating
little.
them and,
Yeah.
trying to get the demons out. So he started making these really terrifyingly beautiful sculptures of these faces that he would see when these people were going through these convulsive therapies and these shock therapies. And he would sculpt them into these really beautiful marbles and stones and polish the stones.
I think I
And
know who you're talking about.
yeah, so there's like he made I think 69 of them total, and then that was it. But there's a room in I think it's the Upper Belvedere in Vienna, and they have they're just all facing outward in a circle, and you can just walk around. They don't have all of them, but they have maybe 20 of them or 30, and it's just like gives me goosebumps every time I think about it because he's captured these like really insane faces.
That's amazing.
And he
I think
started. Go ahead.
no. You. Sorry, I cut you off.
He started thinking that like maybe he was like capturing the demons by like sculpting them into these stones. He started to get really kind of esoteric and kind of crazy with it. I think, yeah, I think himself he kind of like went a little bit mad with that. But man, his sculptures are really amazing, and I'm sure you would like them because they're just like you're capturing something like really vulnerable with your sculptures.
Thank you.
Yeah. So that's actually something I want to ask you about is I kind of asked it before, but I mean, what do you think it is that turns people off so much about it? Is it just the truth of aging?
I think part of it, I think that, societally we don't value women, especially after, a certain age. Um, they kind of tend to disappear out of everything from, public image to, movie screens to you name it. And, we tend to lose value in that moment because, what's the most valuable form of a woman? You have to be young, you have to be fertile, you have to be, pretty tall, skinny, whatever. And so I think there's a discomfort with kind of showing things like age spots and unfiltered pores and that kind of level of it. But I think there's also another side of it, which is that when somebody looks at art, what they're bringing to it is their own baggage. And, one of the reasons I actually hate kind of writing blurbs about like what my art is about because I'm much more interested in hearing what somebody sees in it because you learn a lot about a person in that moment.
Mm.
And everybody's got kind of like really different ideas of what a facial expression can be, or like I kind of wonder whether we all see color the same way, for example. And so it's a little bit of that. And so I think people have a really negative view of growing old and growing frail and don't necessarily appreciate everything else that comes with that, and the safety and the wisdom and the fact that you get comfortable in your body and you get, I don't know that this applies to anybody else, but for me at least, well, like as I'm getting older, I'm in my mid-30s now, I feel a lot more grounded in my physical self than I did 10, 15 years ago. And so I think there's an element of that as well.
Yeah, you have kind of like your art is kind of like anti-Instagram, isn't it?
I think so. That's a good way of putting it.
Anti-filter.
Anti-filter, yeah. Yeah, I see that.
Well, that's actually brings up another question of like I kind of want to dive into this as much as we can without me having the direct experience, but um, what has been your experience being a woman in the arts? Because I mean, you've been in different parts of the world, so I assume that there's some kind of differences that you notice, but um, yeah, I mean, especially a woman who's making like authentic artwork, I mean, there's a lot of women that, for whatever reason end up sticking with this kind of pretty artwork or whatever. And not that that's bad. It's just like someone who's really making and facing this like truth of being what it means to be human with their sculpture. Like, what has that been like from the standpoint of being a woman?
I mean, I don't know because I don't know anything else. I think I've been pretty lucky. Um, I've heard from a lot of other female artists, how they'll get like mansplained and, people will kind of tend to take them a little bit less seriously. And I haven't found that so much. I think in the last couple of years, I've only had maybe like one dude come up and be like, oh, if they were bigger, then they would be gallery worthy, or then they would be. But for the most part, I think it's been like for me, it's been fine. It's hard to kind of suss out because I don't know what it's like in the States. I tend to actually sell more pieces in the States than I do in Canada. And part of the reason for that is that we have kind of like a very small community of artists, and there's a lot of gatekeeping going on. And
hmm
um, funny enough, it's actually been easier. I changed my last name to my partner's for many reasons, but one of the reasons was that it was a lot easier because I'm actually first generation Canadian. My parents are Polish, and our last name is like half the alphabet.
Yeah.
And it kind of came with two consequences, and one was either it was a really good icebreaker, or the other was that people wouldn't even try and like just kind of like push it aside because it's uncomfortable and it's difficult.
Yeah.
You get a lot of stupid things like, oh, your English is really good, or like, where are you really from, and like stuff like that. And so um, there's less of a filter, I think, to criticize kind of like a person around if that person is a woman than if it were a man. And so I can't say 100% that kind of plays into it. But I definitely think that that's part of what affects how art goes out into the world.
Mm-hmm.
That made any sense, but
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I suppose that the work kind of precedes that a little bit. I mean, there's so much like power in the image of it. It's sort of like commanding of its own respect, I think. I think that, yeah, I don't know. I'm not gonna try to, mansplain the what it's like to be a female artist, but I can only imagine that there's like that must be really frustrating, especially with with the Polish last name or whatever, like kind of compounding on people dismissing you because you're a woman. But yeah, that's good that you've been able to kind of navigate that and it hasn't been too difficult.
it's been all right. I mean, the truth of it is that, as kind of like a white woman in North America, it comes with a lot of privilege, and there's a lot of
Yeah.
doors that open up probably far, far more easily than they would for somebody else. And so, I don't feel like I can really speak to like the hardships of getting into the art world because, who am I to really know what those are?
Uh, we'll take a short break, and then when we come back, we'll do guest questions and rapid fire questions. Have you heard of Drawsome.com? Of course you haven't, because it hasn't officially launched yet. But I have talked to Manny Abatizian, the founder, about it in detail, and it's gonna be awesome. The Drawsome app is an exciting new platform that's coming soon for artists and art lovers that is going to change the game. It's a creative social marketplace where artists can post their artwork, receive commissions, and even turn each post into a print-on-demand product that's drop-shipped directly to your customers. That means people can choose if they want your design on a print, mug, t-shirt, whatever, and you don't have to deal with the printing or shipping. You want some of that, don't you? Hop on over to drawsome.com, that's DRAWSOME.com, and sign up to be the first to receive updates and news as soon as it's launched in iOS, Android, and web. Okay. Okay, so welcome back. And we're gonna take a question from Chance McGee. So let me know if you hear it, okay?
Hi, Julia. This is Chance McGee. I'm a new fan of your work. Just came across it because of Sam Davis podcast and just found your Instagram. Very incredible stuff. I wanted to specifically ask you, what what allows you to have this balance between innocence and I would say like a kind of adult intimacy in your work, not necessarily a sexual intimacy, but something associated with adulthood. And I get a similar vibe from your work that I get when I look at James Jean, some of his illustration work. He deals with more psychological subjects sometimes in his work, and he presents it almost in this kind of children's book illustration style sometimes. But the subject matter tends to be quite adult. So my question, I've always admired that when artists are able to come across this balance in their work. Do you have any inspirations or any advice that you would give for staying on that line? Because it seems like a very unique balance that you're able to maintain. And it's something that I would like to try in my art as well. So any advice you have would be very useful. Thank you.
Did you get it?
I got it. Wow. That is a solid question.
He's good at those, yeah.
It's also really funny because I also have kind of Instagram fanned him, and he's super, super talented, and his work is really emotive. So I find it really funny that he would ask that.
Who, Chance?
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Nice.
There's a drawing of Storm that is just unreal. Man, okay. I'm trying to like gather my thoughts from that. I have an idea of what it is, but I also don't know. So I think when you're looking at age and you're looking at people as they get older, there's also a childlike element in that. I think things. I don't want to say people get set in their ways because that's not entirely true, but there's often an openness of emotion that comes out, and I think my openness of emotion actually comes from a gut reaction to the opposite, because coming from a Slavic family, things kind of stay in the family, and I come from a family of women and matriarchs who were very strong and kind of very opinionated, and not always very healthy. And I think I've kind of hit a point where I'm putting it all out there. There is no longer room in my life for kind of hiding emotion or hiding selfhood or hiding interaction and relationship. There isn't room for that kind of closed off side of it. And so I think part of the kind of childlike element that I mean is that there is an openness to that. So you kind of revert back to a stage where you're not able to hide, and kind of there's no stoicism in it. There's no shell, there's no crust. And so I think that's an element of it. And then the other side of it is that they are fairly expressive, so they have a lot of face. They have a lot of movement and micro movement, and we're so responsive to that as just humans. We tend to look at things that we don't even realize that we notice, like the slight movement of an eyebrow or something in the mouth, and that will create an emotional response because we tend to mimic it.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you have something that is, especially when you have something that's realistic, if it registers in your brain as a human emotion, you will inadvertently mirror that. Like you'll create it on your own face, and that'll actually cause you to like subliminally feel whatever that,
Yeah,
sculpture.
mirror neurons. Yeah, I've
Yeah,
heard of this. Yeah.
exactly. And so I think that's part of it. Nudity obviously plays a part as well, because we tend, especially women tend to cover up as they get older. We're told that, our skirts have to be longer, that, things can't be as loose fitting, things can't be as, which is, utter and complete bullshit. But I think having figures that are nude and old is incredibly vulnerable. It's very raw, and it makes a lot of people really uncomfortable, because it's there's almost like a decrepitude that like we try and hide away. Like we're very removed from death, and this is a step away from it while you're kind of living your golden years. And so I think the notion that we tend to fade in different ways, or we tend to change in different ways, makes people very, very uncomfortable and elicits a very strong emotional reaction.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What I consider.
Yeah, that's a great answer to that question. Yeah, that's interesting that you brought up vulnerability and like the age plus the nudity. By the way, I think nude and old is a better name for your Instagram page.
Duly noticed.
You would really love the Czech puppet sculpting, or the Czech puppetry, because the work is, there's a certain kind of authenticity to that as too, in the wood and to the facial expressions. But it's interesting. I was thinking while you were answering about your work, and it's like it's op it's it's big enough. Are there space for both of those things? And I think that's what makes it so human because, despite how much we dig and how much we kind of figure out, our baggage from childhood or whatever, like, and no matter how much we process that, like, it's there, like there's always pain there, there's always sadness, there's always like joy somewhere in there. As long as you can feel the pain and the sadness, you can also feel the joy. So I think that that's one of the things that makes the work so powerful is like, yes, like visually it looks like flesh and it looks like a actual person, but like expressively there's both of those things. There's like the reality of that everyone faces the same end,
Mm.
and also the kind of depth of joy. And it really feels kind of like what you said earlier, where like there's no room to hide. Like you're not there's no room in that for your life anymore. Like you just this is it. Like this is life. Like there's aging and there's joy and there's sadness and there's all of these things. And I think that that's one thing that I get when I see your work, especially like one of the strong things is like it really feels like these people have totally accepted all of that and they're like, I'm just gonna enjoy myself. Like we're gonna have fun with this. 'Cause I get that kind of sense of like um abandon, like abandoned toward like the reality of life or whatever. And there's a real kind of like something like really heartwarming about that.
It's a really nice thing to hear. I think it's very true. You asked me earlier whether it's kind of based on anything, and I said it was based on emotion. And one of the things that I kind of keep coming back to is that, at the end of the day, I do find that like, I do have a very, and I try and tap into it when I can. I have a very deep-seated joy. It's kind of like a hunger for living, and I think part of that comes from having kind of lost a lot. But I think a good part of that, and I don't want to mix this up with like, oh, I'm like super happy and like everything is great, and that kind of like joy culture where you have to be happy all the time, and it kind
Yeah.
of eliminates all this other emotion. But I think what you're saying is kind of true to this, in that in order to feel the joy, you have to be able to feel all of this other stuff. You
Yeah.
have to be able to connect with all of that, because if you can't, then you can't appreciate all the good things that come out of that.
Yeah. And you can't feel it completely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's another powerful thing about your work is like it's just there, like it's confronting you. It's like looking you in the face, like this is reality. So, um, can we talk a little bit about maybe some things that you learned? I mean, we can keep it to a couple of things or whatever, but some kind of advice or experience that you might offer for younger artists, or just they don't have to be sculptors. They don't have to be women. That could be advice for female artists, could be advice.
Um. Oh man. I think you know one thing to remember when you're kind of starting to put yourself out there is that everybody wants to be a critic. Everybody wants to have an opinion. Everybody wants to give advice, and so you know when you find something that resonates, dive in. And it's uncomfortable, especially at first, because you kind of have to, it's very easy to internalize, the idea that something's supposed to be a certain way. And if you're doing things a little bit differently, then, is it the right decision? And I would say, really lean into that discomfort. And it is uncomfortable, and it is kind of a growing step. And I think everybody that I've talked to that kind of really follows their own kind of the beat of their own drum, I would say, and that makes art or makes whatever, or studies something in a way that isn't conventional, um, has to go through that step of kind of pushing past that comfort level and going on to the next plane. And when you do, that's when you level up. That's when you kind of get into it. And then the other one is, you can be as talented as you possibly can be. If you're not willing to put in the work and the time, that muscle atrophies, and you're not going to make progress. And so you have to be really willing to practice and to fail. And like there's a lot of failure that comes before these pieces. There's a lot of stuff that like I would never show, and I just kind of like hide, and like somebody will come over and I'm just like, have this, get it out of the house, please.
Yeah.
And so there's not kind of a perfect answer. There might be a lot of transition before you get to a place where you are, maybe not satisfied, because I'm speaking for myself, I'm never satisfied with something that I make, but at least okay with it.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think if I heard you correctly, to me it sounded like just kind of like staying true to what, true to yourself really when you're making the work, despite what the trend is or despite what, people are saying necessarily, because every artist that is a trailblazer or someone who makes some kind of new approach to something, most of the time they have pushback. Very, very little times, if you look at history, do artists that changed things or anybody who changed things were like well received at first. I mean, Messerschmitt was a perfect example. Like he got basically kicked out and expelled, but his work was completely incredible, just because he was being honest, basically.
Honesty is the hardest thing that you can do.
Yeah.
It's very easy to try and comply to something, but sorry, there's a cleaning truck passing by. If there's a lot of noise, that's why. I think, honesty is the hardest way to be, really. But also, one of the things that I didn't mention, but is probably really vital, is money and resources. And for a lot of us, that's not something that's readily available, especially in the beginning. And so, people kind of think that like, you come fledged into the world and like suddenly you're an artist. That's not how it works. A lot of the people that do this, myself included, will have another job that they work in order to sustain this. I'm not doing it now anymore, but it's, you got to do the grind in order to have the other means. And there's definitely a dichotomy between kind of the haves and the have-nots in the art world, where you have people that come into it and like don't need to do anything else, and so they can dedicate loads of time and so striving to find the balance where like you can be your true self and also make that work. There's absolutely no shame in that. In fact, for a lot of us, it's necessity, and it doesn't make you any less of an artist if that's what you need to build up your career. You do what you have to, and that's the best that you can do, really.
Yeah, and I actually do want to point that out again, but this word came up, unapologetically authentic. I think that if we want to be authentic unapologetically in our work, I saw a quote the other day that said, like, if you want to be an authentic artist, like, just accept and kind of be ready to face about 10 years of like relative poverty. I don't know if that's necessarily true. I mean, you can get a job and work that job, but if you really want to build your practice, like you're going to have to like not, pursue that other job 100% really. Like you have to give a lot of yourself to your work and your learning.
It
Yeah.
takes a lot of grit. It takes a lot of grit, and it can be hard because, like it or not, we live in a society that doesn't value artists. It doesn't value, musicians, and we don't put our resources there, when like in reality, that is what makes our world great. And there is kind of like what's accepted, what's a normal thing to be, and you have to accept the fact that you're kind of, you're doing weird stuff. Like you're not doing a sketch of a flower or like a landscape. You're doing, weird things, whether it's like a skeleton or like a caricature or something like that. And so it takes you outside of kind of the readily acceptable
Mm-hmm.
thing. It's just like, you kind of walk up to someone and they're like, what do you do? And it's like, I'm a sculptor. And then like the conversation just dries up.
Yeah.
Like, well, okay. I'm just going to be the oddball. By the way, here's like a weird old naked person. Like, would you like to look at this? And so I think, yeah, if you can throw in the time and kind of the ability to accept that it is a very strange thing to be doing in this day and age, then that's a start.
Yeah, I also like what you said about work, putting in the work. It's like, yeah, I think that there's this mystification of art where people say, oh, you're so talented or whatever. Well, there's a lot of people that say that talent that doesn't really exist. I prefer to call it orientation, like you have an orientation to make work, but that's not really what makes you good at the work. You're not naturally good at it. I mean, it's like someone who's a surgeon, that person practices hours, 10,
Yeah.
20, 15 hours a day. And if anybody practices something like that, then at the end of the, 5-year period or whatever, they're going to be pretty good at it. So it's like art has this thing where because it is kind of like a fringe thing, or it's kind of like, oh yeah, my brother's sister's cousin does sculpture, it's like one of those things. It's become kind of like mystified. And the reality is, and this message is really to the artists, because I'm totally happy with my audience thinking I'm a magician. But for the artist, like there's no real mystification. You just have to like find people that are good and practice and learn from them and join the groups of people who are doing the same thing, and just grind away, like keep working at it and stay authentic, because that I think that we kind of lose it a little bit, like when we don't stay authentic. It becomes like less fulfilling.
I think you put it really well, and I agree with you. I really don't like the word talent. I think skill is probably a more appropriate way. And like the truth of it is like if somebody puts a drawing out there and that drawing is really beautiful, it the chances that they just woke up one day and are able to kind of create that is they've put hundreds of thousands of hours into practicing and into making stuff. Like I can't tell you how many weird things and how many like failures I made before I was able to make like a proper hand that I was like
Mhm.
satisfied with, or
Yeah.
like I tried carving stone and like we live in the city, so like my balcony is just like overlooking somebody else and there's all this stone dust flying around and it's like tick, 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 tick. And it's not quite the right thing, and so you try something else, and so there's a lot of trial and error, and there is just a lot of practice. Like you say, like a surgeon doesn't just come into it being able to do a perfect stitch. They have practiced that stitch on oranges, on pigskin, on whatever it is that they need to practice on in order to get it perfectly before they can move on to the real thing.
Or we hope that they did. We hope that
Oh
they're
god,
good.
yeah.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I just had my brain just dropped it. Mm.
I'll come back.
Yeah, it'll come back as soon as the interview's over.
Yeah.
So, have you, let me just ask a couple of quick questions. I don't know if we have time for like the whole rapid fire thing, but I do want to ask, like, have you done or have you thought about doing any other like races of people, like black skin or Asian skin or whatever?
I'm actually really glad you asked that because I've been thinking about it a lot. Um, the truth is, yes, I have. I have thought about it a lot. Um, and I am working around and mulling around a discomfort that I have as someone that has a responsibility in art, and that is that, the figures that I make are incredibly vulnerable. They are naked, they are present, they are raw and like, really, really delicate. And unfortunately, we have a history in art of exoticizing and using and portraying different races of people in a way that is objectifying and disrespectful.
Mm-hmm.
And so my job as an artist is not to repeat that. As
Mm-hmm.
as someone who ultimately does put people in a really raw state,
Mm-hmm.
I have to find a way that is not doing more harm than good, I would say.
No. Yeah, that makes sense. Do you use real hair?
I use wool.
Okay.
I use
So in a
wool.
way, it's real hair. It's real wool. Okay.
Yeah. Um, because they're not, so if it was silicone, I'd be able to actually like punch in individual hairs. But because the material is hard and because it goes into like a high heat setting,
Mm-hmm.
I end up having to put on the hair after it's already cured, and so I have to find a way to glue it on, which is much harder to do.
Mm-hmm. So do you have any shows or anything that you wanna promote? You have something coming up, right?
Yeah, I have it's the Toronto Outdoor Art Fair. So we're in full blown lockdown with curfews and everything. So I'm not going to be going to Toronto this year, but I'll be there virtually, and a lot of this like the new stuff will be there. And then I also work locally with a little gallery. Oh, you froze. Oh, there you are.
Oh, no.
Um, I work with a little gallery in the like Montreal Plateau called Usine Sans Issue, or like Usine 106U.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where a lot of my ceramic work is right now. And so those are kind of my two things at the moment.
And people can buy your prints. You have prints of your work, yeah?
I do, yeah. So I've got a website, and it's all like the easiest way to get it is just like Instagram. I've got a link tree, and I'll just take you wherever you want to go.
Nice, nice.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks for your time. Do you have anything that you want to ask me? That's always the funniest question of the interview because most people are like, no, I don't think so.
I actually, what made you decide to do this? Because like I imagine you're an artist yourself, and so you like probably felt that the resources weren't necessarily there in the same way. But like, why this format? Like, why this kind of project? Like, what made
You
you do
mean
this?
you mean interviews?
Yeah.
Oh, I guess that's a good question. I think it's because I've always been interested in talking to artists. When I was in college, we had on Fridays we had a professional artist come in and they would share their work and their story and everything. And I was always the one like asking all the questions, and the rest of the people were sighing because that meant that they had to stay there longer on a Friday. But I was always really fascinated with not just the work, but also kind of like how they decided to be an artist or how that kind of how they make a living with it and what life is like, because for me, like that part of it was like one of the most important parts of my education because I wanted to know how to live as an artist. So here's a living artist, right here. So, um, yeah, so that's part of the answer. And then, yeah, I just like talking to people and seeing kind of the pattern or like the kind of underlying principles that people use and practice in order to like stay authentic as artists and keep their career going. And yeah, yeah. And I like people. I like artists. I like other artists. That's the short answer.
That's a good answer. And the other thing I like, because you do sculptural work yourself, you said you're kind of shifting away from it. Um, why is that?
Why am I shifting away from sculpture?
Yeah.
I'm not really shifting away from it. I'm actually probably going to be getting into more like 3D, like VR digital sculpture.
Okay.
Um, I can show you one I just did. I don't know if you can see. Here, I'll hold them up. Like a little Martin Luther King Jr. And then you probably recognize
Oh my god.
that.
It's got a like Java the Hutt energy to it.
Yeah, I was doing Java on that one. But yeah, that was for January. It was like a sculpture a day in January. So I did those and then I like photoshopped them up a little bit and put them in the different scenes. Um, so yeah, I don't think I'll ever be able to get away from sculpture. This puppet here was sculpted and I'm definitely always like into 3D stuff and sculpting, but yeah, I think I'm just trying to move more into something that's I can see like on the horizon that like augmented reality and virtual reality and stuff is definitely going to be like more and more of a ubiquitous thing. And I'm studying motion design now, so putting those two things together is seems like the logical move. But I love the clay. Like I've just put on a podcast for like 5 hours. I can just like play with the clay. I can't help myself. It's so nice. Yeah.
Yeah, I hear that. It's a good kind of tactile release, and like I don't know about you, but like I find that I can't like I need something. There's like two levels of brain, and you
Yeah.
need one that is just like tactile and kind of rich and physical, and like the higher brain can just kind of like do whatever it's doing in the process and can release a lot of whatever in that way. Um, how did you get into sculpture?
Um, let's see. I think like the turning point in sculpture for me was in high school because I had a pretty rough patch basically from like let's say like 14 to 20 was like really rough time in my life. And so when I guess I was 15 or so, and I started to learn how to do clay sculpture, and then I started winning these awards. Like I was pretty good right away at clay sculpting. And then yeah, I think that I just because it was a rough time and the kind of grounding with the clay and working with the clay and like using my creativity and being able to see that manifested was very therapeutic, and it was like the only thing that I was like really good at right away. Um, and yeah, I think I just fell in love with it at that moment. And then of course, I love like your kind of work that you do, or like the sculptural stuff that, there's like a whole story kind of contained in one piece. Um, yeah, yeah. So that was the moment for me, I think. And I've done a lot of other like strange kinds of sculpture. Like I was doing life casting for a while, so a lot of those really I would have people make like crazy expressions, and then I would cast that, and then I'd put like found object stuff over that, and yeah. So yeah, that was a really long answer to a very simple question, but there you go.
Yeah, that's funny. I kind of had a flashback of putting someone in a live cast and like everything that's involved in actually doing that, including like convincing someone to like,
Yeah.
like, Vaseline on their face and then just like plaster over it.
Here, just breathe through the straw. Here,
Yeah.
let me stick the straw in your mouth. Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing kind of like when you have an idea, like the energy that you're willing to put into making it a reality, including like doing stuff like that, like convincing someone to sit still for however amount of time while you just,
Yeah,
covered in
most of the time there were strangers or people that I didn't know very well. So
that's even better.
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
how did
I'll
you
send
find
you
it?
some
Like
some
approach
photos of that work. That was a fun time. That was right before I moved to Prague, actually.
How long have you been in Prague?
7 years now.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
yeah,
got there's a good art culture on that side. Like the east of Europe kind of tends to really embrace their morbid side and their dark
yeah,
side.
oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah.
I really like that.
Well, if you ever come to Prague, we could have some pierogies.
That sounds like a plan. I have not had those in a very long time.
Cool. Well, thanks for your time. It was a pleasure talking to you, and I'll send you an email with some links and stuff.
I would love that. Thank you.
Cool.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. Okay. So, Julia Barnett, everybody, and we'll see you next week.